Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. One of the most famous lines in literary history, the opening of Jane Austen's classic novel Pride and Prejudice, published back in 1813. It sets the tone for a novel which was very much a social commentary on the status of women in rural 19th century England, in particular the need for a woman to marry well in order to secure her future. What, I hear you all collectively saying, does this have to do with my next guest author? Well, Fiona Palmer is a best-selling rural fiction writer who has reimagined this classic story, transporting it to 21st century rural Australia with impressive results. Matters of the Heart, published by Hachette Australia, is Fiona Palmer's 11th novel and is a rich, heartwarming tale about family, about finding love and female empowerment in an era when first impressions can be skewed by social media and getting to know someone means letting your guard down. I'm thrilled to welcome Fiona to the podcast today. Hi, Fiona.
Hi, how you going?
Really well. How are you going?
Yeah, not too bad. It's a public holiday here today. Got the family down, so got kids and everything. It's all happening. It's lovely.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, Fiona, it's been a good 20 years since I last read Pride and Prejudice, but your new novel took me back to a really comforting place, to a tale that I loved and knew so well and yet was refreshingly different. Could you tell me what inspired you to revive this classic plot for your modern tale?
Well, for a start, I read Pride and Prejudice during school, but nothing triggered then. But it wasn't until, I was a published author, and I think I watched the Keira Knightley version again, and I think it was from there it just triggered. The rural setting would work so well for Pride and Prejudice, and on and off I would think about it and have different scenarios where I think it would work, and thought about it often, but it wasn't until I was with Rachel on a boat cruise and she was reading Legible, and then we got discussing Pride and Prejudice and how much we love it, and I told her, I've always wanted to write a rural version, and she's like, yeah, you should, and so I did. And well, first I asked my publisher, would this interest you guys, and they said, just write it. And I did, and that's really how it happened.
Yeah, so you said it was Rachel Johns that you spoke to first about it.
Yeah, we were just sitting there together in our cabin and discussing it, and yeah, she really supported me and said, yeah, go on, you should write it. So all those ideas then, they just sort of rushed forward, and I had an absolute ball trying to piece it together. It was great.
The result is absolutely fantastic. And I found it as I read it that I kept making these comparisons between Jane Austen's novel and yours. Just as an example, you've used even many of the same character names, albeit in slightly different forms. For example, Fitzwilliam Darcy is simply Will and Charles Bingley is just Charlie. And whilst I was reasonably certain what the outcome of the story was going to be, I loved the page-turning tension you managed to build in. It was almost like watching the Titanic movie. You know what's going to happen, but you can't look away. I wanted to know, was that something you considered as you were writing this, and was it a concern for you?
Yeah, definitely. I write books that you want to sort of be engaging the reader and having turning the pages. I was very conscious of how to keep it engaging, how to retain some of that original storyline, but bring it into the modern world and sort of make it engaging. Therefore, there was a few things changed. The part where Will Darcy writes her a letter, I thought, well, that's not really exciting for the reader. So I sort of had to change bits and pieces and, make it a bit more interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. For those who haven't read it, can you tell me a bit more about it?
Yeah, so it starts off with Lizzie, and she's perfect to write about because all my rural stories are about strong women. And so writing about Lizzie was just so easy. Lizzie was slightly different, and I loved that about her. So writing her as this dedicated farmer who was so into how to run the farm and make it work and make it profitable and trying to look after her family. And then, of course, Charlie buys the place, and along comes his mate, Will Darcy, who's, a big farming magnate up there, who's, they all know about because he's wealthy, and everything just slotted in really well. And, of course, then you've got to have Wickham. And what better way, I saw Wickham as this young, cheeky rodeo cowboy rider comes along. So.
Now, one of the most interesting aspects of this novel is that Lizzie, as you said, is a farmer, and she makes no bones about the fact that this is who she is and what she wants to do with her life. But it's not easy being a female farmer, is it?
Back probably when I was younger, it wasn't very common for daughters to just take on it was passed down to sons, etc. So it's more and more common now. There's daughters that are like, yes, I want to stay and work the farm, but it's still pretty tough for them. It comes with its own challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I found it really interesting that even in 2019, Lizzie's not really taken very seriously as a farmer, despite the fact that she's super smart and she's well versed on farming techniques. I mean, just the way she's treated by Will's father is a case in point, don't you think?
Yeah, very much so. The thing is, you've still got, probably people around that think very old-fashioned. I can still remember certain families that it was just the firstborn son got the farm. That's just how it goes, and certain things like that. But it's shifting. We're a bit, it takes time out here.
I was going to say that, interestingly, that female farmer phenomenon seems to be spawning quite a great deal of literary attention at the moment, with more Australian novels exploring the idea that women are very capable of running farms, and not just as ancillary support or as farm hands. I mean, I just read Tricia Stringer's The Model Wife, for example, and also Maya Linnell's Wildflower Ridge. I mean, both of those explore that idea that more and more women are stepping up to the plate and taking over the running of the family farm. And as for Lizzie's family, this is especially important as there are no boys to take over from her father. So I was wanting to ask you, is this something that you've witnessed yourself?
Not really. I've got a friend who's running the farm with her brothers, and my uncle, he had two daughters, and neither of them sort of wanted to stay and work the farm. So, he ended up selling it, which I guess is where a lot of that comes from. I would have jumped at the chance, had it been my father sort of thing. So there's a little bit of that sort of pushes the story.
Yeah. So I wanted to touch a little bit more on the rural setting of this novel for a moment. I mean, the book is littered with references to the Bennetts' precarious financial situation, the drought, the frost, no money to pay bills, the decision to lease out part of their property to Ken Collins to supplement their income, and the fact that they are most definitely at the mercy of the weather. It's a reminder of the difficulties faced by our farmers in this day and age. Is this something you consciously wanted to address in this book?
Yeah, definitely. We've been through droughts. My father's a contractor for farmers, and when they have no money, well, then they can't employ him. So therefore, Dad had absolutely no work, and he actually had to go to another town. He went to a town an hour and a half away to find a job to work because his business was just not making any money through the droughts, and a whole suffer because of that, because you're sort of relying on the community of farmers. It's very, very huge input. So I've lived through a lot of the times, being raised in a farming community, and you see, like, I work as a farmhand as well, so I see firsthand the devastation of a frost, can wipe out half your yield. If it's not a frost, it's a drought. If it's not a drought, you get a flood. So it's such a gamble trying to get through a season.
Yeah, I think, you can't live in Australia and not be cognizant of the terrible plight that farmers face, every single year. It's
one of those things that it's such a huge gamble. You're risking a lot of money and a lot of time, and no one knows what Mother Nature's going to do. So it's one of those really tough industries.
You've just touched on the fact that despite being a very successful published author, you still work as a farmhand, and I can see those experiences reflected in Lizzie's work on Longbourn. The land is part of her, and the sense of place that you've built into this novel is incredibly strong. So I wanted to ask you, what is it about working on the farm that draws you to it?
I think it's from when I was little. We spent every weekend out at my uncle's farm playing with my cousins. So I think the passion for farming was born from a very young age, and it wasn't until my friends had an extra header and they asked if I'd come drive it, I realise how much it was a part of me, and being out there, on the header or on the tractor at seeding, it felt right, and I absolutely love going to work out there, and it's a great balance for writing. Because I'm not very good at sitting inside, especially when it's beautiful outside. So writing and then going to the farm, it's a great balance. I get a break. I have time to think and create stories. So I continue to sort of work both jobs, I guess you could say. And, each one sort of inspires the other.
I mean, despite the vastly different worlds portrayed in Jane Austen's novel and yours, you explore some very common themes, themes that seem to transcend time and place. For example, people still tend to be wary of love when there's an obvious difference in financial standing, whether it's in 19th century England or 21st century Australia, don't they?
Yeah, definitely. I think especially with farms through history, you've got the farming son who's been on the farm the whole life, and along comes a lady, they get married, and if it doesn't work out down the track 5 years, 10 years, then they leave and half the farm sort of goes with them. So it is you can sort of understand why a lot of people are a bit wary, and it can cause lots of mayhem if it doesn't work out.
You've kind of turned that on its head a little bit in Matters of the Heart, because Lizzie is just as wary of a man wanting to marry her for the farm as much as Will or Charlie seem to be of a woman who might want to marry them for their money.
Well, that's it. I think Lizzie's place, she doesn't want a man. She's like, the farm's where her passion is, and she's not out to be saved by a man either. So I like that about her.
Yeah, and I love the fact that she says that very clearly to her mum. I don't need a man to help me run the farm. She's quite prepared to stand on her own 2 feet and run it solo if need be.
And a lot of women, we have that ability. I mean, there's days that I'm quite happy to sit back and let my husband do things for me, which is great. But when he's not around, I know I can do it as well. And I love that challenge. And being out the farm does that. It gives me the ability to try things I've never had the opportunity to try before. And it's such an inspiring thing when you can accomplish something you never thought you could do. So.
Yeah, I agree. Now, back in 19th century England, wealth usually indicated a class divide. Do you think that necessarily translates to modern day Australia? I mean, the fact that both Will Darcy and Charlie Bingley come from wealthy landowning families, does that make them any different from the Bennets, who also come from a long line of landowners?
You would think not, but there's, the difference. The wealth is, they're sort of very much city people. I mean, you look at Charlie's sister, she's into designer clothes, and if you don't have wealth, you're not into designer clothes and things like that. So there is a bit of a divide.
Does the wealth of the Bingleys and the Darcys justify the way Jane and Lizzie are treated?
Probably not. There's that prejudice, a bit of judgment. Even today, people are judgmental. Maybe it's just human nature. You can't help but judge before you've actually got to know a person.
Communication or miscommunication, I think, is an important part of your book as much as it was in Jane Austen's version. And you touched a little bit on this before when you mentioned Will Darcy's letter. Do you think that modern technology and methods and social media add to the adverse perceptions in this novel?
Definitely. I mean, gosh, I know that when texting my husband, he can take it the wrong way, and then next minute you have a carney over something you didn't realise he's implied in a text. So it's very much so easy to misunderstand, and that's the sad thing about social media. But I guess the help of emojis to, portray what tone your text is. But nothing beats face-to-face communication. But sometimes even then, like my husband and I, can be on two different levels. So it is pretty hard. Communication is such a big part of, life.
Sure is. Now, marriage for her daughters is uppermost in the modern Mrs. Bennet's mind, just as it was for the 19th century Mrs. Bennet. But I'm not sure her motivations are any different from her 19th century counterpart. The differences seem to be more in a woman's ability to be able to choose in the modern day. Women, as we've talked about before, are no longer dependent on men for support. But I wanted to ask you if you thought that was different in rural communities where job opportunities and real choices were likely not as great for women as they might be in cities.
Probably. I think it's that little bit of traditionalism. Like Mrs. Bennet's a little bit older, so she's still got some of the old-fashioned ways that they were brought up where, you're very much a homely wife. Out in the country, you'd find a fella, you'd look after him and you'd have kids. And that was just, I grew up with that attitude from my own parents. Not once did I think, I was off to have a wonderful career before husband and children. I guess we just sort of wanted what our parents had, and, finding the right man and settling down was top of the list. But so in a way, I was right, Mrs. Bennet sort of wants that for her children. She wants them to find a husband and have kids and have the life she had, and not so much trying to marry them off, but just wanting them to be happy.
Yeah. I was thinking about Lottie, Lizzie's best friend, and I think she feels like she doesn't have a lot of choices because she lives in such a small place.
Yeah, well, that's it. And she felt a bit cornered. She sort of was stuck. And I think, with him coming along, it gave her an out, and she gave it a chance. And by giving that chance, she found something she thought she'd never find. I really liked the idea of, finding that, I don't want to give too much away, but finding out that had a deeper side, and that comes down to that judgment again. Yeah. In public, he puts on, when he's nervous, he becomes someone a bit different. But, behind the scenes, when they're quiet times together, she was seeing a side of him not many did.
So, Fiona, I read with interest that you're a third-generation speedway racer and that you spent 7 years speedway racing before you turned your hand to writing. I imagine that would have been a fairly male-dominated activity. How did that experience inform your writing, do you think?
I'm very much, I think I idolised my dad growing up, still do. And Dad used to race and my granddad used to race. And, we had go-karts from when we were 3, and I just loved being behind the wheel, still do. And, as a matter of fact, both my kids are now racing and I'm back racing, and my dad. So we all go over as a family and race together, which is wonderful, just being together like that. And I always had this thing growing up as I just wanted to do everything the boys could do, just that idolising my dad and what he could do. And I just wanted to be out in the shed and didn't want to be in the house cooking. So that does leak into my stories, I guess, of my leading women and what I like to write is, who I'd like to be, I think.
Yeah. Did you find that you had to be, a certain way in order to get along in that world, tougher in many ways, or did you have to put on a persona, or was it more just about, being yourself and just enjoying that, and you didn't experience any backlash from the boys that were doing it?
They were always pretty good. Weren't overly chatty. Like, they'd go and chat to the other boys pretty good, but being a girl, you're a bit different. I raced, but I didn't know a lot about motors and anything like that, so you couldn't really converse that well. But in saying that, there was a few of the other guys that were always really supportive and would always say hey, and I always had my dad there as well. So you sort of you race long enough and you end up getting to know everyone, and it helps.
Just changing tack a little bit, I wanted to ask you, did you always want to be a writer?
No, that's so funny. Everyone says, did you always want to write? And I went, no, it was never on my radar. I fell into it. Seriously, I left school early. I was terrible at English and maths. My teacher was very literary focused, so it was all about the spelling and the grammar. And I can remember writing these stories that I absolutely loved writing, and my friends would be like, "Oh, your story's so good," but we were never marked on our storytelling ability, not with this teacher anyway. So for me, it was never on my radar, but I did used to write lots of letters to my grandparents and my mum, and occasionally I'd write just stuff down in a notebook. When I was sitting at prep board, I'd just write little feelings and bits and pieces of what I was thinking, because my husband often says I'm a nice queen. I'm not very good at speaking or showing my emotions, but yet when it comes to writing them down, it's like I can tap into them so much easier. And anyway, I started writing this story was mainly out of a way to find a break. I was busy at the shop working. I had a partnership in the local shop with my mum. I had 2 small children and I didn't have any time to read. So I started writing, thinking of this story, and it grew so much in my mind that I was having trouble trying to remember all my scenes I was writing. So I started typing it out, and I'd been to college, so I could touch type 65 words per minute, so that was really handy.
Fantastic.
And then just over time, I kept, writing this out until I'd finished, and then, just sort of it happened all like that so quickly.
That's amazing. What a brilliant story. How important is your life in a rural community to your writing?
It has been wonderful in the ability that I've been able to share the true stories of what it's like to live in a rural community. I've got a book, The Sunburnt Country, which is based around the drought that we went through, and just how it affects everyone, how everyone out here, you have to volunteer on the ambulance or the services because they're not paid jobs. And so it's all the locals who attend crash, they could be coming across people they know, having to fight bushfires. I loved being able to share our rural stories with the rest of the world. It's quite an honour, really.
I have a lot of aspiring and emerging writers who listen to this podcast, and I wanted to ask, given your success and the prolific nature of your writing, what would be your top 3 tips for people who are looking to be published?
For a start, I think is to write it down, get it down. A lot of people say, I want to write a story, but they've never got past that idea. I met this young girl the other day at an author talk, and she'd already written 50,000 words, and I said, "You're so far in front of everyone else," the fact that she's got words on a paper. A lot of people will procrastinate and not start because they don't think they've got it. You need to write anything down, whether it's rubbish, whether it's just point form. Like I say, you cannot edit a blank page. And a lot of our work is in the editing stage. We'll read over the book up to 10 times trying to get it to shine. So that first draft is just about getting words on a page. That's definitely a number 1 tip. Number 2 is probably write what you're passionate about. That's where mine started, from passion. I wanted to write about my rural lifestyle, and it was the passion that guided me in what I was writing. So write about what you know and what you love, and have thick skin is probably the other one, because not everyone's going to like what you write. Don't read all the reviews. Sometimes you don't need to read, reviews, because there's going to be people that don't like your story, and they're entitled to their opinion. So, don't engage either with your reviewers.
It's so funny that you should say that. I was fortunate enough to be at a book launch yesterday, and I was talking to some wonderful published authors there yesterday, and I asked them, do you read the reviews on Goodreads or, Amazon or whatever? And there were varying responses, but I think all of them came to the same essential conclusion, was that you can't hang your hat on reading all those reviews because, as you say, not everybody's going to like what you've written, and that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to take it with a pinch of salt. you know, a lot of people might not even like rurals and will read it and then give it a bad rating. But you got to understand that it wasn't their cup of tea to start with.
Yeah.
But I must admit I do read the reviews because I'm just hanging out to know if people think I've done Pride and Prejudice any good. So that was a bit, you know, I was a bit scared there how it would be taken.
As somebody who studied Pride and Prejudice for the HSC way back in the day, I thought you did a wonderful job. It truly was a delight to read this book, and it brought up some really wonderful memories, as I said in the beginning of the podcast. So, you know, congratulations on that. A job really well done.
Oh, thank you. I just really sort of set out to write it as close as possible to how I would enjoy reading it.
So, Fiona, I want to ask you, what's next? Are you working on something else at the moment?
Yes, I'm nearly 60,000 words through the next one, which is kind of penned off the grid at the moment, is this title I'm working with. But that's come about through my children and technology and just, you know, the cyberbullying, the sexting and all those issues that, you know, are forefront at the moment for me with teenagers. So I've got a couple of families that they actually go to a lovely coastal place, Bremer Bay in WA, with beautiful white beach sands, and it's sort of set there at a camp where there's no internet, so it's wonderful.
Oh, sounds divine. I think we could all, do with a technology break from time to time, so that sounds absolutely blissful.
We head there in January for holidays, so we're counting down the days.
Yeah, brilliant. Fiona, if readers wanted to connect with you, how can they find you?
I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and I always try to get back to people if there's any questions. I'm always on social media or email, and I have a website at fionaharmer.com, which I need to update with some books because I have a shop on there and I like to personally sign books and send them off.
Well, Fiona, I wanted to thank you so very much for joining the growing community of Australian authors on Talking Aussie Books. It's been absolutely delightful to chat to you today.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure for me as well, and hopefully the internet stayed connected long enough to record it all.
Fiona, I wish you very much success with this wonderful novel.
Yeah, very exciting. Always is when a new novel comes out. So thank you so much for taking the time to interview me.
My pleasure. And listeners, you guessed it, a free copy of this book is up for grabs, courtesy of Hachette. All you need to do is visit my Instagram or Facebook page and follow the prompts to be in with a chance to win. Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.